that are expected or estimated, let me say, estimated to have cancer, that number today is much more than, let's say, 20 years ago. So that's a different issue. Access and general healthcare. So when you go into societies, into the developed world where people have access to healthcare, then sometimes this cancer are diagnosed earlier compared to, let's say, Africa, but the incidence will not change. So early diagnosis, you have access to treatment that is sometimes just a modality. But once the cancer stage increases, then we're now talking about multi-modality treatment. And so you might have radiation, surgery, chemotherapy, all of these will be brought to bear. But if the cancer is diagnosed early, then you can usually treat with one single modality. Again, these are just general, specific cancer. We can talk about them differently.
Earlier, you talked about eating habits as one of the factors causing the increasing cancer burden in African countries. What is wrong with the eating habits of Africans?
I would say, in fact, if I think of me when I was growing up in Cameroon, I mean, the food that we eat was less fatty than it is today. We're more active. I mean, even my parents certainly were more active than me. So we know that the food that we eat, the processed food, the more fatty food you have, that has an influence in terms of increasing your probability of having cancer. It doesn't, it's not a single factor, but it's a combination. So it acts in combination with other factors. So cancer is a disease which I would describe coming from inside you, that could be made up of your genes, of what you have, your gene. Then something coming from outside, which could be now environment, something to do with your lifestyle, which goes your social factors, maybe you're smoking, maybe you're drinking. All of these combine to increase your risk of getting cancer. So when you look in Africa, for instance, the more fatty food. So the things that are internal, we cannot change. Your genetic makeup, we cannot change. So you have a gene mutation that might make you liable to having certain kinds of cancer. That is fine. You cannot change that. But the other environmental things, like if you are smoking, if you are drinking, or you live in an area where insanitary area, yeah, that could also affect your probability of getting cancer.
Can you tell us more about the hereditary factor?
Yes, it's just that, for instance, you have the gene for, let's say, breast cancer, BRCA1, BRCA2, where which is transmitted, yes. So you could have the mother, even the far aunt. So your far aunt might have that gene and you have that gene. But there's a likelihood that maybe if your far aunt or a direct relative, could be your far aunt, could be your mother, might have that, and then you as a daughter will have that likelihood. So that's why when you come for cancer screening, or when they do an evaluation, they always ask you, do you know who in your family has cancer? So that's important because you take that into consideration.
In many African countries, high alcohol consumption is almost endemic. And you highlighted this as a risk factor or an enabling factor. How much does this factor contribute to the increasing cancer burden on the continent?
We know that drinking alcohol will increase your probability of having certain cancer. And so in the United States, for instance, when you see people with head and neck, or even here in Cameroon as well, or smoking, these are all they are related. But what factor it contributes, what, if I put it as I indicated before, you have the environmental, you have the genetic factor, and then you have these social habits. All of them individually contribute to you having a certain type of cancer. And therefore, what will I give? What about somebody who smokes and drinks in combination, or somebody who only smokes doesn't drink, or somebody who drinks but doesn't smoke? So all of that, is that chewing tobacco? Is that cigarette smoking? Is that marijuana, is that all of this? So all of these might contribute differently.
What explains the high death rate, the high cancer death rate in Africa?
Well, I would say that, in Africa, most of the patients that have cancer are never diagnosed. They died not knowing that they have cancer. If you take the case of Cameroon, if you look at the cancer registry, let's say in Yaoundé and Douala, maybe combined they might diagnose up to maybe 5,000 cases a year, maybe much less. I don't know the exact figure. But if the figure for Cameroon, for instance, the figure for Cameroon, we have about estimated 20 to 26,000 new cases of cancer in Cameroon. And imagine that only maybe 20-25% of them are actually diagnosed, or much less, or even much less than that. That then tells you that you cannot manage something that you don't know it exists, right? So all of those that are diagnosed can be managed. So that's already a big problem. If somebody has HIV or AIDS and you don't diagnose it, then you can't treat it when you don't diagnose. You have to treat something that you diagnose. So I say, significant, not just, Cameroon is probably in a better position compared to other African countries where, they have very few tools for diagnosis. And so if you don't diagnose, you cannot manage, or you cannot manage properly.
Now, among the different types of cancer, cancer of the lungs, cancer of the cervix, cancer of the bones, cancer of the blood, prostate cancer, are there some that are more deadly than others?
Yeah, there are some that are more deadly. There are some that will depend, they might be deadly, depend on when they are diagnosed. For instance, something like cervical cancer is quite easy to be treated with just freezing of the tissue when it just starts. As it develops, it becomes increasingly difficult until at the time when it starts spreading to other organs, then it becomes very, very difficult to treat. So something like cervical cancer, when you look at the 5-year survival, like say in the United States, is very high. Because why? Or prostate cancer, for that matter, is diagnosed early because people have access to good health care. Good health care translates that if you have some issue, then you're able to be diagnosed early. You go to see your doctor or your nurse practitioner, and you're diagnosed early. So if he doesn't, he can send you to a specialist who then help with the diagnosis. But if you don't have good health care system in the first place, then people might be thinking that maybe the disease or the problem they're having might be related to something else. Or you go to doctors who don't have a lot of experience in this, they might be treating it as something else, and then while the cancer is growing as well. It's not just a problem in Cameroon, it's a problem all over in Africa, and also some of the developing countries in South America and the Far East. So the problem of diagnosis problem of diagnosis is a real issue.
Blood cancer seems to be quite specific and different from the other cancers or types of cancer that affect specific organs. This one is in the blood.
Yes, I would say, compared to solid cancer, which is cancer that in the prostate, which is a solid tumor. You have prostate, cervix, breast. Blood cancer is a little bit different, so it attacks some of the cellular component of blood. So and therefore the presentation to the patient is a little bit different. So that's certainly different from a solid tumor where you can actually see. In terms of diagnosis of blood cancer, that take a completely different route, and you need specific equipment and technology to do that compared to, let's say, solid tumors, and laboratories to confirm that. So when I say its presentation, so from the start to when it's getting too serious. Prostate cancer, for instance, from when it starts, and then to where it progresses when it moves from now your prostate to a different organ. Or for breast, when it moves from the breast maybe to the lymph nodes, now to a secondary organ. It could be the brain, it could be the liver, it could be the lung. So the presentations are different. The diagnosis tool that you use for them are also a little bit different too. Yes.
I said earlier that cancer is deadly, no matter the type. However, I think we should mention here that cancer is not a death sentence. There is hope.
Absolutely. Cancer is not a death sentence. Some cancers are treated here in Cameroon, and patients go on to die from other diseases. Yeah, some also, and they get killed by the cancer. There's not run away that cancer is deadly. But it depends. That's why I can say that it depends on a lot of things. When it was the type of cancer, when it was diagnosed, and what tools you have to manage the cancer. So if you don't have good tools, you know that this is this cancer. If you don't have the good tools to manage it, you are not able to be successful as well. So it depends.
Right now, we go into the newsstands and we will see what the newspapers reported this week in the Republic of Cameroon. Immaculate Fogwe with the press review.
As reported by the Guardian Post, fuel price hike imminent as government hints on cutting subsidy by 50%. According to municipal updates, senatorial election, CBDM clips wings of aspiring regional municipal councillors. The Voice says senatorial elections 2023 political gimmicks. Mano, the reporter, SDF NEC reorganization Littoral region, Honorable Jean-Michel Nincher, and tight corner as Mochigal Commission gathers storm. According to the Guardian Post, Customs generates over 897 billion francs CFA in 2022. Municipal update says 2025 presidential election, palmmongers confused over the unpredictable nature of President Paul Biya. The median thinks Prime Minister Chief Joseph John Gute has cause to smile concerning the Olimbe Stadium scandal. The Sun highlights the message addressed to diplomats by the head of state. He says dialogue and negotiation is a key to ending conflicts in Northwest and Southwest regions. Municipal updates. Rebuilding the Northwest region, Media North throws weight behind reconstruction and development plan. The Horizon exclaims, after falling out with sponsors, Francis Ngannou stripped off UFC heavyweight crown.
Thank you, Immaculate Fogwe, for the press review. Now, Professor, what are the challenges of cancer management in Africa?
As I indicated earlier, the management of cancer in Africa is, there are so many challenges, to put it quite simply. There are so many challenges, management. So first of all, we go from diagnosis. So the key professionals that help in the diagnosis of cancer, are pathologists. Okay? So are the physicians that specialize to look at a piece of tissue that's been taken from a patient that's suspected to have cancer, to look at that under the microscope and to determine what cancer it is and stuff like that. We do not have that. So, for instance, in Africa, they estimate that you have one pathology for maybe 2 million people. In Cameroon, we are lucky. I think we have, from the survey I did, which I wouldn't quite classify scientific, we have about 40 pathologists, but there might be more. There might be more in Cameroon, but in some other countries, I look at Central Africa, there were just 2. In Chad, there were very few. So when you have these are the channels through which cancer needs to be diagnosed. If first you have very few physicians trained, so that's the first issue. First, you have very few patients that are being diagnosed because you don't have the physician. Then you have the physicians. The next thing is you need the technologists or the technicians, if I may call it that way, the technicians, the people that are going to prepare the sample for the physician, the pathologist to read it and interpret it. We have few of those. Then you go to equipment. again, this is just diagnosis. We have very few equipment to actually, equipment in hospitals to actually do, once you have a pathologist. If the pathologist, without his equipment, he's useless. So you need equipment for the diagnosis to help him prepare and interpret his result. Then if you manage to have that information, so you've confirmed the patient has, let's say, prostate cancer as an example, or cervical cancer as an example. The next thing that you might need is my prostate cancer localized in my prostate, or has it gone to other organs? Because that's going to help you determine how you are going to manage this disease. Then you start looking at things like, okay, if I need to do that, maybe I need a CT scan. We have quite a lot of CT scans in Cameroon, so that's a good tool you can use. Then you need something like nuclear medicine. Nuclear medicine, we have SPECT CT or PET CT, which are expensive equipment that takes money to buy and run, and people train to work on them. Cameroon has none, as an example. Cameroon is not unique. Nigeria did not have any nuclear medicine till a few years ago. Now they're actually installing their PET scanner. But most countries in Africa do not have access to that. Patients sometimes from Cameroon have to travel maybe to Morocco to have this type of equipment to be used so that they can see whether the cancer has spread. So you have, these are some of the challenges. We're not even talking about treatment, we're just talking about diagnosis. So you've diagnosed, you have few equipment to diagnose, you have few physicians that are trained to do the diagnosis, you have few technicians that can help in the preparation of the sample and all that. Then with that, with modern tools, you might want them to look at, does this patient have, are there some genetic defects, are there some biomarkers that you can use? We don't have that in Africa. We don't have this equipment in Africa, in most, generally in most African countries. Or sometimes you have a doubt. Maybe you ask for a second opinion on a sample. So the first pathologist might say, okay, we have, this is prostate cancer or this is cancer. And sometimes the clinical manifestation does not match with that. So you ask for a second opinion. It might take another 6 weeks. So even the time from diagnosis, from the time you take the sample to when you get the final report about whether there's cancer or not, is long. And then you have the other thing that you need to determine, is my cancer, to look into the chemistry, into the biology of the cancer. We have very few of them. Histochemistry equipment, like in Cameroon and in other African countries. So sometimes these samples are sent out of Cameroon. And even if you're to have them, again, you lack the technicians to work on them. So you see a myriad of issues to do with equipment, staff, physicians, and staff in terms of technologies or technicians. So you can see the problem is huge.
That's just about diagnosis. Now, what about treatment? Treatment seems to have the same or similar challenges.
Yes, there are similar challenges. I would say for something, for instance, the main way you treat cancer, there are various, but you have the key principal means of treating cancer. The first is you have surgery. So if something that is localized, the surgeon can go in and take it out, right? And so you eliminate the cancer that way. Or you can do chemotherapy, which is systemic, right? So you can treat the cancer that way, or you can use radiation therapy. Or you can use all of these in combination, or two of these in combination. And so, do you have a surgeon? Do we have a surgeon that are specialized, that are not a general surgeon, but surgical oncology, that are trained to take out the tumor? Because not any surgeon that will go in and just take the tumor like that, right? You have to be trained. You need to know what to do. And so we don't have that. Sometimes we just do general. There are very few surgical oncologists, for instance. And so those are issues. Now, even when you come to chemotherapy, the chemotherapy drugs are much more expensive than your general drugs, maybe for high blood pressure, or for other diseases. Chemotherapy drugs are generally very expensive. The other thing is that to administer chemotherapy, you need to be in a hospital setting. So the patient needs to be hospitalized or come for 6 or 7 hours for the chemotherapy to be administered. You can see the cost. The cost related to the administration of chemo, or buying the chemo, and sometimes hospitalization. That will be different from even HIV or AIDS, where the patient might take their treatment at home. Here, you have to take the treatment in a hospital setting, which makes it quite expensive. Then, if you talk to radiation therapy, which should be used in about 65% of all cancer cases in our ideal world, then you see that the facilities are not even available. So these are huge. These are huge issue. I can tell you the issue of radiation therapy, because that's my area of expertise. And the issue I look at, for instance, in the case of Cameroon, I can identify 18 problems in terms of radiation therapy, or why we cannot adopt radiation therapy easily in Cameroon and in so many African countries.
What are some of the major problems among the 18 that you mentioned?
Let's look at the linear accelerator, which is an equipment that you need in order to treat cancer with radiotherapy. So a linear accelerator, a brand new linear accelerator, costs anywhere from about $1.5 million to $3.6 million. That's what? That's about $1 million up to anywhere from $2 to $3 million. This is money that you can build a district hospital with. That's for a single unit. That's for a single linear accelerator. So now imagine in the case of Cameroon, or in the case of Chad, or which country you might want to pick out, how many of them will afford 3 million, let's just say 1.5 million, maybe 5 or 6 of them for install. The room that we are seeing in is a bunker. This is just single room. This single room, the cost of constructing this bunker where we sit in, there are actually 2 here, is actually more than the cost of constructing the whole building, the whole hospital that you can see here of 82 private rooms. Just this, I'm just talking the concrete part, that these 2 rooms cost more than the entire facility, which is about 6,000 square meters. So this is extremely expensive, to the room to construct. So you have equipment, it's expensive. The room is very expensive. This is called a bunker. It's not a regular room with a linear accelerator. It's expensive. The linear accelerator, again, it costs, in the United States, where I'm very familiar, a linear accelerator, the maintenance cost is about $190,000 a year. That's about $120 million. That could be the budget of a district hospital, of a small district hospital. So you can see there are so many problems. How many of these will you fund in order to provide radiation? That's why you can see that radiation therapy in Africa has been slow to adopt because of this virus. I mean, there are other issues to do with power. This machine cannot be turned off. You can see you can hear the noise. So it needs to be power on, and that power needs to be stable power and smooth power. So imagine here we're in Bonaberry, the light is off, is on, is off, is on. This is not an issue restricted to Cameroon. In other African countries, including Nigeria, maybe not Ivory Coast or Ghana, the power is very, very unstable. And therefore, for instance, here we have a standby generator. Sometimes we might go for 5 days on generator power because there's no power. Or the power is just 2-phase, not 1-phase, not 3-phase. So you have so many issues like that hamper the development of radiation therapy. Then again, you have the specialists to work on this machine. You have the spare parts. So even if you are paying $190,000, this would be US price. Then these parts have to go to Africa. They have to go through custom. It might take 3 days, it might take 4 days through custom, and all of this. And because the custom doesn't know what the linear accelerator, even if we explain, it still has to go through the normal process because the government really doesn't want terrible things to get into the country, so they have to check all of this. So when you look at these, that there are so many issues, and that's why you see radiation therapy or radiotherapy has been slow to be adopted in Africa.
From what you have said now, we can quickly conclude that there is need for more investment. Governments of African nations should invest more in the health sector, and particularly in the cancer management and, of course, the other health problems affecting Africans at large. Is this the way out?
Of course, they need to invest in oncology. I mean, I know a couple of years ago, the presidents or the first ladies of several African countries came together and made a declaration. This was about 5-10 years ago, and that the number of women that were dying from cervical cancer and that radiation therapy should be made available. It was just a declaration, but it doesn't hold much, simply because of the costs that I'm telling you like this. These costs are significant. And so I think that from my experience and talking to people in other countries and looking at it, that the best way for the government to do it, yes, they need to invest in the equipment, they need to invest in people, but they need to create partnerships that way, public-private partnership that can enable others to come in to provide these services that the government, even if you convert the entire health budget of Cameroon for oncology, it will not be sufficient. It will not be sufficient to provide what you ideally need. So, but how do you still treat the patient? That's why you need to adopt partnership or do things a little bit differently. Following the status quo way of doing business will not help Africans.
40 or 48 million francs CFA for treatment is certainly out of reach for many Cameroonians, many Africans who are among the poor, the low-income earners living below the poverty line. That is quite huge.
Let's say the case of a linear accelerator, for instance. You have, in order to treat a patient on the linear accelerator, and to do it to the high quality, this patient needs to be CT scanned. Okay, if you just look at the CT scan itself, like in Cameroon, a CT scan might cost you maybe 150,000. Then we have, if the patient is a head and neck patient, they have to use a mask like this so that the patient does not move during treatment, right? And this mask alone costs $100 to transport it here and pay cost. You can see that the cost is high. Then you have the treatment planning. When I talk about the purchase of the linear accelerator, I do not include the cost of the software. The software could cost anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 that you use to make the program that runs this machine. So there are various costs, and these costs have to be distributed to the patient. So you also have quality control equipment. So if you buy a linear accelerator without the quality control equipment, it's also useless. So for instance, we purchase quality assurance equipment that costs an additional $300,000 on top of the cost of the linear accelerator. All of these things, they need licenses, because that's the way it operates at this high-end, I would say this high-end market. So radiation therapy is an expensive endeavor, but as I indicated, creating partnership between public, private, and some other innovative way, that's the only way I think Africa can solve the problems.
Right, we're going to take some interviews right now. Interviews of the week.
The neurological disease is any kind of disease that affects the nervous system. So that's the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. The most common ones that everybody knows of is stroke, epilepsy, pain, Headaches are very common and they can be quite debilitating, and infections that affect the nervous system. The biggest challenge is that there are so few of us, and the tools that we need to practice effectively are hard to get and often very expensive, which means that the people who have neurological disease have challenges, one, finding us because there are so few of us, and when they do get us, some of the things that they need in terms of medication, tests, investigations are often beyond their means.
School-related gender-based violence stems from home to the society and to the school. And many of us, even us standing here, even me, we have faced this kind of violence. Either you were sexually harassed, either you were punished because you were talking to a girl a teacher was looking at, either you are a girl who was punished because somebody wanted to get you and you refused, either you are a teacher who is being hated by a child because the parents are rich and they don't respect you. So there is a lot that is going on in schools, and the only way we can create, we can inculcate, we can conscientize the society is to use the media. And I really strongly and I believe that the respect for the media is very important. We understand and we know that journalists, the media, you are the watchdogs of the society. You are the most important personalities in the society. Thus, this work that we are doing today, to work with the media personnel, to see how we can collaborate and propagate messages against school-related gender-based violence. And I must say this, continuously school yourself to be able to do gender responsive reporting and to help the community to change, because you can change it. As GID, we have different tools and methods that we'll present to you. These tools and methods are those we think are participatory enough, and they can help you also to build your capacity as well as report in a gender responsive way. So these tools are very important. One of the biggest tools that we want to have is to come out with a forum, a kind of forum together with journalists, where we will be doing continuous exchange, where we will be giving people, empowering people, and also getting feedback from the journalists.
The creation of special treatment centers at the level of regional controls and divisional controls that will enable authorizing officers to execute their budget themselves, and the financial controller will be left with the task of exercising his role as the judge of regularity of expenditures. Another innovation is the optimization of the mobilization of non-fiscal revenues. Non-fiscal revenues that are like service revenue, the fluctuation of price of primary consumer goods. And then we know this is as a result, not only as a result of the war between Russia and Ukraine, but also with the present dispensation that we find ourselves. We are just coming from the COVID era. We are still to stabilize the aftermath of COVID pandemic. We also have a war that is going on. Secondly, most people don't respect the budget execution deadline. Most of them don't want to respect the procedures. Most councils don't know that the budget should be executed from 1st January to 31st of December. Most of them, they incur a lot of delay in the contract and work process, and by the time the contract is attributed, the contractor does not have ample time for execution to take place, and then payment to be done in the system before the 31st of December.
When I started at NDI, there were only 4 African countries that were considered democratic in the sense of allowing for political parties to form. And those 4 countries were Senegal, Botswana, Mauritius, and the Gambia. But when you look at Africa today, you can see that well over 12 countries are considered fully democratic, and maybe 18 or 19 others are considered partially democratic, which makes for a total of 30. And I'm extremely proud of the fact that in these 30 countries that have made democratic progress in the past 2.5 decades, the institute that I represent, the National Democratic Institute, has had a lot of engagement in those countries and has contributed positively to the changes that we see in those countries. It's, when you go into a country like South Africa and post-apartheid South Africa in the 90s, and people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, now of blessed memory, come up to you and say, thank you, NDI, for helping us with Project Vote. helping train South Africans on how to engage in the electoral process, coming after decades of the exclusion of black South Africans in the political processes of their country. In the year 2000, we went to Senegal, and Senegal, like many of the other African countries, had very low representation of women in parliament. And we made the rounds. We went from political party to political party, and we said to them, we can make a commitment to you that if you nominate women to run for political office, we would train those women to be excellent candidates, and we'll make sure that they win their campaigns. And across the board, Senegalese political parties signed a joint agreement without waiting for a law to be passed, a joint agreement saying that they have committed to partner with NDI and that they will nominate at least 30% of women to run for local elections in Senegal in the year 2000. They nominated over 8,000 women. NDI trained all 8,000 women to run for election across party lines, and thousands of them got elected into local councils in Senegal in the year 2000. Today, it's those women who were elected at the local level who are now running for seats in parliament. And when you go to Senegal today, they are very proud of the fact that close to 48% of their representation in parliament is matter of women.
You're welcome back. We are still with our guest, Professor Paul, MOBIT radiation oncology physicist. Now, Professor, earlier you talked about the challenge of inadequate equipment as far as cancer management is concerned on the African continent. Now, here at the Cameroon Oncology Center, I've seen at least two heavy and high technology, up-to-date machines, and one of them is the one that's behind you. Can you explain the function? What is the machine that's behind you, and how does it function? What is it used for?
This is a medical linear accelerator. So the medical linear accelerator in general is the core to modern radiation oncology or to modern radiotherapy. So this machine behind me is a modern machine. We have several energies, electron and photon energy. It has a portal imager, so we can actually take a picture of the patient before we treat, and we can move the patient so that the patient align with the way the patient was scanned. It has what they call MLC. So we do IMRT for those who are in the field, intensity modulation radiation therapy. We also do a rapid arc bed with what they call standard MUs. So there's no dose variation when you treat. And the dose rate is very high, so we can actually treat a high number of patients on this machine. So this is the engine. So in some big centers, like if you go to MD Anderson, they will have about MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is the biggest in the world. They will have about 23 of these.
What's the difference between the high technology CT scan that you have here and the regular CT scan that is used in some of the centers, some of the health amenities in the Republic of Cameroon and other African countries?
The CT scan that we have here is what we call a big bore radiation oncology CT scan. So we are able with this one to do 4G. So a moving object, we can image very, very well on that CT scan that you saw. The image quality is much, much better than the other CT scan. Then it is adapted so that the CT scan that is image that is gotten from that scan, we can use that to plan the radiation treatment for each patient. So they work in combination. So that's, again, much more expensive than a regular CT scan. And it provides us more information. Some of them we can actually outline the tumor in some of the software that it comes with.
With these high technology and up-to-date equipments, is it possible to handle all cases of cancer?
I would say we can handle for solid tumors. So tumors anywhere in the body, we can we can do it quite effectively.
Can state subventions help to reduce the cost?
Yes, state subvention can help. We are working with the government of Cameroon. In fact, we have a partnership agreement we've signed with the government of Cameroon to do exactly that. But government works a little bit slowly sometimes, but it's working to bring help to some cancer patients. Again, we are talking this machine, as we sit in this room, can treat with maybe 300 cancer patients a year. So if we have another machine in the next zone and operate just one shift, we'll treat another 300. If we double and have two shifts, that's 1,200. So from the 25 or 26,000 cases that we have, you can see that this is just a drop in the pocket. So you need many of these in various combinations in both private and public in order to be able to even make a dent on the number of cancer patients that really need this high-end radiation. Right. So that's what I can say with regards to that. So and actually just, in fact, in all of Africa too, they need something like that. I mean, every country should at least have one or two, even though if not going to help, can at least help some patients rather than sending patients to India or outside of Cameroon or outside of Africa, supporting the healthcare system of India rather than building up our own. I think I would prefer that Cameroonians or Africans build their own system up, not to send the patients that are able to afford to India and to Europe, to South Africa, to build the healthcare, because they're not treating you at a subsidized rate. They treat you at a regular price. So they are charging the full price for you when you come from Cameroon. And so, but Cameroonians and Africans should build their own system and support their own rather than subsidizing other systems.
Let us focus on one of the types of cancer. And this is because October is the breast cancer month, and we want to focus on breast cancer.
Research has shown that Africans or people of African descent, which include Africans and African Americans or African Brazilian, are more susceptible to having breast cancer, and the bad type of breast cancer, triple negative breast cancer. And it affects much younger women than, let's say, other types of breast cancer that may be affected older. And so the issue of breast cancer has to be taken by Cameroonians and Africans much more seriously than maybe in the past, because it's shown that compared to the white man, we are more at risk when it comes to breast cancer. And so, so the most important thing is for women and for the families to encourage women as soon as, I would say probably from the age of about 30, to go for regular examination, which I'm not talking examination based on getting a mammogram or anything like that. Go to a physician to examine their breasts, know themselves well, do self-examination, look even on YouTube, they have class on how to do self-examination for breast cancer. So they should know their body, so that if there's something abnormal, so they know, then they're able to bring that to a physician who can then look at it and see whether there is a problem. I mean, here we receive, unfortunately, several cases of metastatic breast cancer, and sometimes for women as young as 28 years old, which is sad. You don't generally see that in let's say the United States or in other European countries, but here we do, and so that really confirms this fact that breast cancer is an issue